I know of a grandchild, not mine luckily, was born with its stomach in its lung. They've saved it. Well, it's a girl actually. But now she's hyperactive, she's going deaf, she's got lots of things wrong with her. Others with feet sticking out of their knees, people with hearts and lungs on the wrong side, extra digits on their hands. Oh, asthmas, leukemias in the children. You could go on forever.
Sheila Gray is the secretary of the British Nuclear Test Veterans Association. For years she's been hearing about leukemias and other deadly cancers affecting ex-servicemen, men who witnessed Britain's nuclear bomb tests in the 50s. Now she's being told an even more harrowing story, a catalogue of cancers and deformities in their children.
I know of one little boy who was born, he was 10 days old, and other than having webbed feet, he was perfectly normal to look at. And he died unexpectedly, and of course they had to hold a post-mortem. And when they did, they found that each of his organs weighed twice what they should, and he was dual sex inside. That was my first introduction to that. That was going way back to 1983 when we first got involved. And since then, they've come along with varying tales. We know of a veteran's daughter who was born with dual sex, and they had to build her into a woman. We have veterans' children, grown up, second generation. They ring me up and say, my father was at such and such a test. I want to get married. Dare I have children?
Tonight we reveal the results of a major Northern Eye investigation into the health of the veterans' children. This is the first time the health records of over 2,500 children of the bomb have been gathered together and studied in detail. The results of our survey suggest alarming levels of genetic damage and raise serious questions about the long-term effects of exposure to radiation. A wedding in South Shields. It's an opportunity for the Reed family to get together, to celebrate, to look forward to children and grandchildren. But for the bride's father, Mike Reed, smiles for the photographers hide a deep concern for his family's future. Mike was at the Christmas Island bomb tests over 30 years ago. Today, he's convinced his children have suffered because of the bomb. The problems began when his first son Alan was born.
They found that he had a blood clot in the head. What it caused was there was a minute hole in the skull, and as he was growing, it was allowing the blood to seep through, it was forming a clot. So he was given a 50-50 chance of living through the operation he had to go through. Fortunately, he did come out of it okay. My second son, Anthony, was born shortly after I left the services. What happened was he was found to have a deformed arm on birth. That involved not having these three centre fingers. He had this little finger and the thumb only.
Nobody can be that ugly.
Once again, I'm wondering what's going on here. This is my second child, problems again. Still naive to radiation. On going through the records of the servicemen who had been on Christmas Island in Australia, just like myself, and seeing the problems what they had, which matched mine, then everything clicked into place.
Anthony's first child was born grossly deformed and died within 6 hours. Then came Stacey. She has cerebral palsy and is partially deaf. She's been in hospital 8 times this year, one of many veterans' grandchildren with serious health problems.
There's other people having the same problems, their children, grandchildren, and probably great-grandchildren now.
starting to get the effects. I want another kid, but to go through that experience that, you know, you just weighing up, is it worth it? I mean, I would like to say I would love a son or even a little girl. Preferably a normal person, as what they refer to as the Stacey where she's a special needs child. Just, if we have a normal kid, it's somebody to look after her at least when we go.
Norman Kitching was an RAF fireman who witnessed bomb tests in Australia. 2 years ago, he was diagnosed as having stomach cancer. 6 weeks later, he died at the age of 52. His widow, Betty, often visits Norman's memorial at the local crematorium with her son, Stephen.
See, the one in the middle, Stephen, with the red rose beside.
Stephen is mentally handicapped.
Nice words, aren't they? It's got his full name there. It wasn't until he was about 2 days old that we realised there was something wrong, because as I picked him from his cot, he was having a convulsion. And I sent for the doctor, and he said it was probably a congenital disease, congenital disorder. And we sent him straight over to the General Hospital in Newcastle. And they said it's certainly a very ill baby, but we couldn't tell then. They couldn't tell then at that stage what was wrong.
Stephen had suffered brain damage. Doctors said it was a congenital condition, something he'd been born with. Now 30, he goes to a special centre for the mentally handicapped in Gateshead.
There isn't a great lot that he does, really. It's difficult to let him go places on his own, just in case he doesn't find the way back, sort of thing. He loves to go to the centre, mainly, I think, because he has a lot of friends there.
What do you think his prospects are for the future?
Not good. I mean, when you think about it, he can't hold, he'll never be able to hold a job down or get married, have children the way a normal person, you know. That's the only thing. It's a shame. I feel he's been robbed of all these things, you know.
And who do you blame for all this?
Well, obviously the people that did the tests in the first place, because they should have known more about it. Because some of these men were made to walk and crawl and run and sit in the radioactive dust. You know, just to see what effect it would have on them. Well, they shouldn't test men in that way.
Britain's nuclear test programme began at Montebello off Australia. 21 atom and hydrogen bombs were detonated over a period of 6 years. In all, nearly 27,000 British servicemen are thought to have taken part in the test programme. It was pushed through at speed so Britain could become a major nuclear power.
1 minute to go. Slowly the seconds tick away.
The memory is still vivid for Thomas Wilson, the first man to step onto the Montebello Islands after the explosion.
Like a huge boiling cauldron, the cloud billowed upwards to a height of 10,000 feet within 2 minutes.
They asked for volunteers, 20 volunteers to enter the island. And the volunteers was you, and you. So after we had been picked to go on the island, they selected the 20. We went onto the islands, and when we got there, we were just given a Geiger counter. We said, "What's a Geiger counter?" "Well, you've just got to watch that pointer go around, and if it goes too far, be careful."
What sort of protection did you have when you went onto the island?
Just an overall and a gas mask, an old-fashioned gas mask, and just an ordinary jungle green hat, which when sitting on the Land Rover when we were doing the rounds, the hats blew up and we couldn't even pick them up. So we hadn't any head covering, anything.
Why couldn't you pick them up?
Because of the radiation.
Led by a group of scientists, Thomas Wilson and the other volunteers scoured the devastated landscape of the island. The samples they collected were later examined for the effects of radiation. The men also studied the damage caused by the atom bomb, which was twice as big as the one which had destroyed Hiroshima 7 years earlier. You had gas masks when you were on the island. How much use were they?
Useless. We couldn't breathe. We had to keep lifting them up to breathe. As we lifted them up, the condensation blocked our viewing, so we had to take them off it to finish.
So you were breathing the air on the island?
Yes, we were breathing, yes.
At the end of the expedition, the troops were taken to a decontamination ship, HMS Tracker. On board, Thomas Wilson was covered in powders and creams and showered and scrubbed 12 times. But trying to wash away radiation didn't work. Do you have any idea how much radiation you were exposed to?
Well, they wrote it in my peer book, and they said that's what I was left with.
What does that mean to you?
Nothing to me, nothing.
Did anybody explain what the consequences of that might be?
No, nobody. Nobody explained anything. After we finished on the Tracker, they just told me to get dressed. And the clothes we were already wearing was taken away from me, put in concrete and thrown into the sea. And we're just, after we left the Tracker, we're just transferred back to our own ship, the Narvik. And that was that. Nothing more, never heard anything more.
Dr. Patrick Green has made a detailed study of the risks faced by the men at Britain's nuclear bomb tests. He says, compared with modern methods, the way of measuring radiation doses in the 50s was very crude.
That poses problems when you look at what happened in the past, because although you may have measurements for the radiation that people were exposed to, A, they're going to be inaccurate, and B, they didn't take into account all the different types of radiation. So you look at a soldier on one of the test sites, you could measure the direct radiation dose he would have got, but nobody was measuring what they were inhaling or what they were eating while they were there. And that is one of the biggest risks, because a lot of dust was thrown up into the atmosphere. That would have come down, food would have been contaminated. Those soldiers were living and working in a radioactive environment.
Thomas Wilson is convinced that the radiation he was exposed to has caused serious health problems for his daughter, Pauline. Soon after she was born, it was discovered she had an extremely rare bone cancer called letroseva.
The daughter nearly died, and she went down to nothing. And they just, as I said, they still can't explain how this disease is being caused. And I still want to find out the problem why and the reason why, which I still believe it was through the radiation. Mind you, the doctors, they said it can only be caused by radiation, this disease. How could a 1-year-old baby be exposed to radiation? You know, where would you get it from? They are saying through x-rays, but she never even had x-rays. They said the wife had x-rays, but she didn't even have an x-ray when she was expecting.
So you're worried that indirectly you caused it?
Yes, I do, yes. I definitely think it did, yes.
The Wilsons fear their family's health problems are passing down through the generations. When Pauline was a child, surgeons had to remove a large lump from behind her ear.
We're in the water.
A similar growth has already been removed from her daughter, Julie.
I keep thinking about it all the time. You know, am I guilty or something I've been ignorant to, or should I been watching myself, or have I done something wrong, you know?
As early as 1911, it was known that the radiation in X-rays could cause cancer. Within 20 years, there were fears that it caused genetic damage too, damage to the genes which passed down from one generation to the next. When the first atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, the immediate effect of a nuclear blast was clear to see. But scientists had already warned that there would be unseen effects of radiation on future generations. They said there was no such thing as a safe dose. Their fears were ignored. As the nuclear power industry developed from the 1950s, warnings about the genetic dangers of radiation were repeated. But studies of people exposed to high doses still showed no firm evidence that genetic damage was being caused. The breakthrough came only last year after Professor Martin Gardner studied workers at the Sellafield nuclear plant in Cumbria. Many children of those workers were suffering from leukemia. Gardner's study linked their illness with their fathers being exposed to radiation. The Gardner report said radiation could damage the unborn child.
Gardner was saying the children had fathers who worked at the plant.